Hey marketers, this is the Girls in Marketing podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We are so excited to get started with the episodes. Just before we do, we want to give you a little introduction to who we are and what we do. Girls in Marketing is an e-learning platform and online community. We are on a mission to bridge the digital skills gap and equalise gender seniority in marketing. Right. That's enough chat. Let's get into the episode. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to make a quick mention of Monday.com's annual online conference, The Elevate Show, which is happening on the 3rd of November. The day will be packed with expert talks about how to become super efficient and improve your workflow, as well as lots of product masterclasses, practical customer stories, insights from the Monday.com leadership team, and much more. It's completely free to sign up and attend both virtually and on demand. You can register for free. Just click the link in the show notes of this episode. Welcome back to the Girls in Marketing podcast. Today I'm joined by Ruth Hartnoll, co-founder and CEO of Matchstick Creative, a purpose-driven creative agency based in Liverpool. Today we're going to be talking about content creation and working with purpose, which is something that I know both Ruth and Matchstick Creative are incredibly passionate about. So let's get into the episode. So, Ruth, I know the roles that you've had throughout your career have been kind of based largely around content. Where do you think that your passion from working in content really kind of comes from and started?
So I think before I started Matchstick Creative 4 years ago, I was always working in SEO, so search engine optimization, content roles, copywriting roles, that kind of thing. But before I got into that, because I didn't really know that marketing was a job, I didn't know that that was a thing that existed. I actually studied creative writing at John Moores University. And all of my background comes from things like poetry and playwriting and reading novels and all that kind of thing. So I always approach marketing from quite a craft-driven point of view. I'm always thinking about language and structure and form. So the fact I ended up running a marketing agency when I didn't know it was a job 10 years ago feels pretty surreal. Yeah. It feels very odd. It's part of the reason why I always go back to my old university and speak on their Writer at Work lecture that they have, because I really want people to know that you can make a living writing. I don't think that's made very apparent. And one of the things that I learned that from was I left uni. I was doing nothing for 4 years. And I was like, what do I even do with this degree I've got? It feels like there's a load of useful stuff, but I don't know what to do with it. And then I saw a job for a copywriter at an agency over in the world, and I was like, I reckon I could do that. So I applied. I met 30% of the criteria. I applied, turned up. I think I charmed them a bit, and that was pretty much all I needed to do. And they were like, yeah, we'll give you a job. You can have a job. And I was like, all right, great. And then that enabled me to job hop very, very quickly. So I sort of kept giving myself the promotion I needed. So that was sort of how it ended up happening. I just had a love for language and words, and then found a completely obscure job advert, and then was able to do what I do now. So that's where it came from.
Yeah, that's really brave actually, because meeting kind of such a small portion of a job description is generally quite off-putting for most people, isn't it? So I think that actually taking that risk and thinking, you know what, I don't make a lot of it, but why not give it a shot, is really good. And I think that's a good message for a lot of people, because we speak to so many people who, are wanting to get into marketing and kind of, like you, maybe come from a slightly unconventional background, or they don't think they've really got the experience to jump into a marketing role. And something I always say to them is if somebody else thinks that they've only got 50% of the job, meet the criteria of 50% of the job description, then they might go for it and you might not. And actually you might meet 70%, but you're doubting the kind of bit that you don't fit. So it's really good. And I think obviously, I wouldn't say to everybody, go for every job that you're not right for, because it's probably wasting your time. But I think sometimes like that, it's good to take that sort of risk. And also what you said about not knowing that marketing was a career before you got into marketing is so super relatable. And I know that so many people listening will really resonate with that, because that was the same
Definitely. And if you look at the thing that always comforts me as well, I'm someone that's gone from being the co-founder of an agency and a content director to now I changed my job title. I keep giving myself the job I want. I was like, I'm not a content director anymore, so I might as well say that I'm a chief exec. So I'm now CEO, but I very deliberately didn't use that title before because it didn't feel like that was what my job was.
Yeah.
Recently, that is what my job's become. If I applied for a CEO job anywhere else, I would not get the job. I think the thing people need to be really acutely aware of is you're allowed to give yourself the thing you need. And I think I just kept doing that. I got, just before the point of me starting the agency, I went for like 3 different jobs, and all of them needed me to have managed people. And none of the places I was working was going to enable me to do that, because it was the catch-22 of, you have got no evidence you've managed people, so you can't manage people. And I'm like, but I can only manage people if you let me manage people. And I kept having that conversation with people. So I was like, oh, fuck it, I'll just go do it myself. I'll go give myself the job I want. Then it turned out I was a good boss. So I was right. So thanks, me.
There you go. And
so
now
you've
created the opportunity for yourself. Yeah, I love that. I think that's really true as well, because with our community, I speak to a lot of kind of, younger women who want to get into marketing, or, they've got their foot on the ladder, but they're only, really fairly junior. And a lot of the questions that we get are sort of like, what's the difference between an executive and an officer? What's the difference between a manager and a whatever else? And it's so difficult having that conversation, because like you say, just because you are maybe CEO for one company doesn't mean that you'd necessarily fit the criteria for that for another company. And so I always sort of say, it's not necessarily the title that you've got to look at, because organisations will use the title sort of completely differently, won't they? And it's not always the same job. So it's more dive into the job description and then see whether that is a fit, rather than just going off the job title.
Totally. And the thing I find mind-blowing about agency models is you can be an executive, and in our world, that's considered bottom of the rung. That's like entry level. It's like a content and social media exec is the bottom level. And then you'll go to other sectors and industries, and executive is the top tier. It's like the best level you can get to. So the nomenclature around the jobs in marketing is so confusing. It doesn't make any sense. So you're absolutely right. Look at the criteria, not the title. And if I looked at the criteria I gave myself for my own chief exec job, I do meet the criteria. Yeah. But for any other chief exec job, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree with that. So kind of going back to what you studied at university, we actually have someone in our team who also studied creative writing at university and kind of has got into working with us through that route as well. So what about that course, did you love? Like, where did you find that love for writing, and how do you think that it's impacted on, your career now?
Yeah, so this is what I talk about most when I go back to Liverpool John Moores to talk about it. That course is now headed up by the extremely brilliant Sarah McLennan. Shout out to Sarah, who was my lecturer, and then she went on to take over the whole damn thing. I'm so happy for her. So she's now head of the department. She's amazing. But yeah, anytime I go and talk on that course, it's basically editing skills. When you're doing creative writing, you have to understand how to give feedback effectively. People in general, particularly in professional settings, are absolutely atrocious at giving feedback. They don't understand how to handle people's feelings. They don't understand how to say I don't like it, because they often just say I don't like it. Yeah. One of my common bits of feedbacks for clients is I don't want an opinion, I want a piece of feedback. So if you say I don't like it, I'll be like, great story. I'm not taking that feedback on board. If they say I don't like it because I don't think it works because of these things, I'm like, that's completely fair, and I'll listen to you now and we'll have a conversation about that. I only know how to do that because I did my degree. I think as well, for me personally, because I'm a complete linguophile, I really, really love language. And I find that if you can find the joy in the craft of the thing you're doing, that gets you through when you're doing really boring social media scheduling, when you're getting through having to write SEO-driven copy. If you as a writer can find the story in the thing you're doing and find the love in that, it makes the job enjoyable. So yeah, for me, it was just basically editing skills, being able to critique properly, understanding the component parts of a story and how you can apply that to a commercial setting is quite important. That gives you quite a useful skill set when you're trying to explain your concept to your client as well. And I think as well, just a love for language. Language is so delicious. So being able to think about that all the time at work is great. So
yeah, definitely. And I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think it goes both ways, doesn't it? Because I guess if you're working with clients, whether they're internal clients or kind of, the agency clients or whatever, and they want to do something and they come to you and say, we really want to do this. And you're thinking, I'm in the position where I'm kind of the one who's advising you on what you should do, and I don't really think that's right. It always goes down better if you can articulate why that's the case, because, again, it's, you don't like getting feedback from them that's sort of them saying, I don't like it, and you're like, okay, great, but that doesn't give me anything to work off. Yeah. It's the same both ways, isn't it? Because it's sort of, that's fine, and I know that you've seen this other brand that also did that, so that's why you want to do it, but in kind of my capacity advising for you and working for you, I don't think that's right, because it always builds better relationships, doesn't it? And having those open conversations and just being able to actually explain why really does make such a difference, doesn't it? So I totally agree with you on that point.
I think as well, being able to articulate your point in as fewer words as possible, I think is really useful. Brevity is the soul of wit and all that. I think if you're able to, if someone says, I've got this idea, and they explain it to you in like 15 sentences, you're like, okay, and then you're able to give feedback in about a sentence or two, I tend to find that wins the room over, because you can demonstrate you've really listened to people, but also you're able to compact your thoughts, similar to how you think about poetry. You're able to bring your idea together very succinctly and be like, I understand why, but think about that, and put it back to them. And I find that people listen better when you're able to demonstrate you've listened really well, and they'll take your ideas on more that way. That was absolutely taught from my course as well. I wouldn't have got that until someone taught me how to listen properly. And being a marketer is a lot about listening. So I think that too.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really underrated skill, 100%. So kind of getting more into the content and the nitty gritty of that, what would you say is like your favourite type of content to create? If you had to pick and you could choose to create any type of content for, any type of brand or whatever it might be, what do you love doing?
Do you know what? I'm actually going to choose quite an unusual thing. I love the glamour of video. Video is like the funnest. Planning it, being able to film it, being able to do the behind the scenes shot. You're always like, yeah, I've really gone to work today. I've really turned up and done work. That always makes me feel very industrious. But actually the thing that like I really enjoy is like opinion pieces. I think when there was a piece we wrote recently about Roe versus Wade, because I absolutely kicked off about it because it was an absurd outcome for the country and for the rest of the world in general. Yeah. And I wrote a piece about it with someone who's had an abortion. And I thought it was an absurd piece of legislation to come through. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And if I was in a job where I wasn't the person who was in charge, and I saw someone who was a female leader not having an opinion on it, I'd have been disappointed. So you also feel, again, as a purpose-driven leader, you feel responsibilities to things that are your personal values. You do have to stand up and talk about them. So writing that piece, it had been a while since I'd had space to like sit down and collect my thoughts in that way. A lot of the writing I do now is to persuade and cajole and tell people what to do. That opinion piece was just getting across an idea. And I think just being able to articulate an idea well is one of my favorite things. So I think my favorite form of content is like a really well-written opinion piece. I really love them. Yeah. So that would be mine.
No, I love that. I totally agree. And I think that there's nothing more powerful than being able to really effectively articulate an opinion piece like that, and feel like as you're reading it, you are really kind of getting a full deep dive into someone's like truest, deepest thoughts on something. But when it's articulated in a great way, it just feels so easy to consume, doesn't it? So I really like that. And I think that, there's definitely nothing more powerful.
Yeah, totally. And also like my favorite my sort of reading maturity has changed as well, because when you're a writer, you're always an active reader. You're only a good writer if you read. So the types of things I read have changed as I've got older. And I think my lean-to is like a New York Times or a New York Magazine type opinion piece. And they're always written with a particular attitude and style. And if it's anything I can emulate now, it's those extremely clever New York writers. That would be the type of writer I'd want to sound like now. So yeah.
Love that. So that kind of leads us on nicely to the next thing that I was going to talk about, which is Matchstick Creative. You only kind of partner with businesses that are trying to do good in the world. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. And for you, what like criteria do you use to kind of qualify whether businesses meet that? What do you look for in a business that you like to work with?
Yeah, so we've at Matchstick, we've just recently become B Corp certified. If anyone's not heard of B Corp certification before, it's effectively a certification that makes you a mission-locked business. When you're a mission-locked business, loads of businesses have got mission statements, right? There'll be people that say we stand for these particular things. These are our values. This is how we demonstrate it. Yeah. The HR team do a bit of a marketing campaign. That's it. Being B Corp locked effectively means that you have to give evidence, a lot of evidence for all the things you do. And then you get given a B Corp score and you can build on that score and improve upon it. There are other brands that are B Corp sort of registered, accredited, certified type people. Patagonia is one of them. I know Patagonia are in the news today because they just got rid of all the rights to the company because part of that reason they did that is because they're a B corporation. So they had that philosophy right from the beginning. So they were like pre-B Corp. They were B Corp before there was B Corp. There's also Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They're a B Corp. Annoyingly, Brewdog are, and none of us think they should be a B Corp, but they are still at the moment. But there's loads of other small businesses like us that are also that. The reason we went through that process is because when myself and my business partner sat down, me and Greg, we were like, so we're going to be working exceptionally hard because we're running a small business. We're going to not get paid very well at the beginning. We're going to work extremely long hours. We're going to have to inspire and cajole all these people to come along with us on this journey. God, we better be doing something we like. I'm not going to do this if I'm just selling a solicitor's or an insurance firm or whatever. We've got to do something that we really care about. Otherwise, I'll be miserable and I'll leave and go work for someone else again. So we were like, okay, so what does that look like? And we thought about the brands we love. And that was people in like charity, third sector, people who were social entrepreneurs like us. So people that just want to help other people. It really boils down to, does it help people or the planet? If it does, they're pretty much good to go. We will work with them. A lot of our stuff falls into things like local government. So we'll work with places like the Growth Platform and the Combined Authority. The Metro Mayor supported things like our Fire Starters project we've got. So a lot of our stuff is basically like, is there a problem that needs solving? Does it help people or the planet at the end of it? We'll help you. That's basically the criteria. So
no, I love that. That's so interesting, and I think that accountability kind of element is so important, and that it's something that you're so passionate about is amazing. In the work that kind of you're doing with Matchstick, are there any standout kind of campaigns, creative campaigns, or any particular pieces of content that you've worked on that have been real standout highlights for you since starting your journey with Matchstick?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it's so difficult to answer actually because, like, as the leader, you're so in the macro and the micro. You're constantly thinking of overall mission, and then because I've only just stepped into that chief exec role, previously I was very like, what have you written in this tweet? I was still very like granular, like thinking about that kind of editorial eye on all of the stuff. If I have to think about projects that we've been involved in that I've probably enjoyed the most, rather than a particular campaign. I really loved working with one of our clients, Bericare, who are a group of care homes. They're a group of care homes that look after the elderly over in Stockport and Staffordshire. And it's been fascinating hearing about the stuff they deal with, the stuff they've had to deal with because of COVID, the fallout of Tory policy. Loads of stuff's impacted them. It's just been really interesting working with them and helping them figure out how to communicate how they've overcome those challenges so successfully. So they're one. And I always love working with the Growth Platform. Our local business support offering in Liverpool, I would debate, is pretty good. It's one of the better ones I've come across at like a regional level. And their team's always so lovely. So I just really enjoy working with people who care about what they do. I just love someone who turns up and gives a shit about their work. I just want them to turn up and be like, I care as much as you. That's all I need. And that'll get me energized about anything we're doing. And I'm like, I'm there with it. Let's do it now.
Get you pumped.
Yeah, totally.
Love it. Yeah, so you've talked quite a bit, and even just now, just mentioning about kind of stepping into the role of CEO and stuff like that, and that transition into leadership. Firstly, how have you kind of found that, and how have you kind of managed that? And also, how have you found that within Matchstick, and how have you gone about creating a really positive work culture in the role that you're now in, and how have you found that sort of balance?
I think there's sort of like two component parts to that question. So the first thing of like becoming a chief exec, how does it feel? It feels like you're constantly turning up to a job where you're woefully underqualified. There's nothing about what my job now looks like. The things I have to look at, we're very fortunate in the fact we're on the Beyond programme that's run through Growth Platform and through Form. And our business mentor is exceptional. So we're very lucky in the fact we've got someone who's built and grown an agency, then closed it. So we've got somebody who's done the journey that we're effectively going on. But being a CEO basically is turning up every day, people thinking you know exactly what you're talking about, and you don't feel like you know what you're talking about. Sometimes you do, and you feel really happy when that happens. I'd say that's about 30% of the time at the moment. I'm hoping it will get better as time goes on.
It will,
at the
I'm
moment, it's like a third. I'm like, oh yeah, I could answer that question. The rest of the time, it doesn't feel like that. In terms of, what was the other part of your question?
Kind of how have you managed sort of fostering a culture of like an inclusive and really positive workspace since transitioning into this role?
Yeah, so I think right from the very beginning of our journey, when we were thinking about things like culture, the main criteria we had was very simple. It was what's been done to us that we wouldn't want to do to anyone else. That was the underlying policy we had. So that enabled us to realise probably about 9 months ago, we said, do you know what, we need someone who knows what they're doing with HR. So we got a really wonderful HR freelancer and she helped us structure a load of governance and policy, including creating our first ever staff handbook. We didn't have one. I never understood the importance of having a staff handbook until I had to go through the process of making one. It's an effort. Congratulations to any HR professional who's ever made one. They're really hard. But through that, we had to define what our maternity and paternity leave was. We had to define what our period leave was. There was loads of stuff we had to put in it. And the only reason we got to do that is because we worked with someone who knew what they were doing. And also things like hybrid working, remote working. We just basically said, what's all the crappy stuff that's been done to us? Let's do the opposite. Honestly, it was mostly how we made about 90% of our decisions. And it worked really well. We've got really loyal team members and we've attracted really values matched people because of that. Because they're like, you're not like the boss I had. And I'm like, yeah, because I had your boss and they were horrible. So we decided not to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really good way of looking at things actually, and kind of structuring what you do based on the negative experiences that you've had and flipping them on their head completely to make sure that what you do is never going to replicate any of those experiences that you've had personally.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a really great way to go about it.
Yeah.
Kind of moving on from that a little bit into kind of something that really aligns a lot with what we do at Girls in Marketing. And I know you've spoken about before, sort of the importance of supporting other women in the industry, in marketing, and kind of giving them, I guess, the support that maybe either you would have liked or you did have. I know you've already mentioned before the support that you had, you know, at university and stuff like that. And I know that it's something super important to you. Why is this something that you're so passionate about, and kind of what have you strived to do throughout your career to kind of support women and maybe entering the industry or who are more junior through kind of sharing your experience?
I grew up on a diet of Star Trek Voyager, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Matilda. There's so many feminist heroes that littered my childhood. I don't think I really had a choice. I find it really odd when I meet women from the same era and I was like, so you were watching Buffy and Captain Janeway and you didn't walk away being like, maybe we should help the women. I find it really weird that people will consume all of that content and then be like, that's not the default response they had. I think because I was so... I consumed so much. I consumed so much TV and films and books. I had all of these very opinionated, boisterous women in my head a lot of the time. So I loved reading and watching things, and their opinions and approaches to things stuck with me. So when I then got to environments where I felt like the women weren't behaving like Captain Janeway and weren't behaving like Buffy, I was like, you're not helping the sisterhood and that's not cool. So I was very adamant to be like, so what was all the stuff that was done to me that I didn't like? Let's do the opposite. Sometimes it can be very complicated to arrive at things and sometimes it can be very simple. For me, that was just an absolute truth. Do unto others as you would like to do unto yourself. It's a very simple philosophy. And actually, that is pretty much what I did. And also, I just find women are doing really interesting things. I just, any of the women that I spend time with, I'll be like, so what are you up to? And they'll be like, well, I'm going to Dubai for a week. And then I'm going to be talking on a podcast about fintech. And I'm the only woman because it's all guys. And then I'm going to like go skateboard for a week. And I'm like, that's cool. None of the men answer like that. None of them have those things going on in their lives. So I was just always like, I want to be around those interesting women doing odd things and to share that with people because I'm naturally a storyteller. So we had the Female Founders series on our blog that we ran for a long time. We've just organised stuff. Like we just organised a meal the other day where there were a load of women. We were like, you started businesses. Let's hear about your experience of doing that. And we just got people in a room. Most of the time it's just getting people talking like this and being like, what are you working on? That's interesting. And then sharing it with people. So
amazing.
It's just, I blame Buffy. That's my short take. I blame Buffy.
Fair enough. I'm sure she'll be happy to take that blame. Yeah. So 2 things I want to ask you then. 2 pieces of advice, if you could share them with me or with us. If you were to give some advice to somebody who's maybe in a similar position to you, so a woman in leadership, who maybe feels like they're not doing enough or they don't feel like they're doing enough to support other women in the industry, but they want to, what kind of things would you suggest that they can do? Like, what are some actionable things that they can do to kind of provide that support to people that, you know, need it and kind of need that leg up and that that support?
Really good question. I've got 2 very simple things. If you're in a meeting and the women keep being interrupted, be the woman to interrupt the man and say you've interrupted her. and do it every time they do it.
Yeah.
Every time they do it. I've been that person. I've been that asshole in the room that's been like, sorry, she wasn't finished. And I don't give a shit who it is that's talking. It could be the chief exec. It could be an intern. It doesn't matter. The amount of times I've been in meetings where men feel like they can interrupt women, and there's literally data to prove it, and infinite stories on everyday sexism on Twitter to prove it. Just be the arsehole to interrupt the men would be one of my first bits of advice. And most importantly, if you don't feel like you can do it for yourself, because it is actually quite awkward to say it for yourself, do it for someone else.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, that's interesting, but she wasn't done. Go on, carry on. And just like cut them off. Just cut them off and let them just do the cut off for the other person. Doing something for someone else, I often find is a lot easier than doing it for yourself. So be the one to cut the man off would be one of my bits of advice. The other thing, if you want to support someone else and you don't know how, particularly if you don't feel confident enough to do it, imagine yourself as your most confident self. Sort of take on a character. You know, like when Beyonce used to go on stage, she became Sasha Fierce.
Yeah.
And she was like, I am that character. Yeah. She's not Beyonce anymore, which is mind-blowing because all of us look at Beyonce and like, I want to be Beyonce. And even Beyonce didn't want to be Beyonce.
She wants to be someone else.
That's mind-blowing, isn't it? Because she is Beyonce. But yeah, so effectively just imagine yourself as this really brave version of yourself. And then it's not even you doing it. Yes. Just act for a little bit. I know people always say fake it till you make it. And I found that advice really unhelpful, actually. But if I'm thinking of myself as a character, as if I was writing a character, I found that much easier because the things that were coming out of my mouth were dialogue instead of me saying it. And that was easier for me to think about.
Yeah.
So interrupt the men and pretend you're someone else for a tiny bit and then you'll feel braver would be mine.
I really love that. And I've got to say, I feel like I'm sure a lot of people listening can kind of relate to this, but I know certainly there've been times in my career, particularly when I was kind of more junior and starting out, where I would have absolutely loved to have had a woman like you in the room to do that for me. And I know that now, you know, it's only come with experience, with time, with, you know, growth and confidence that I would feel more able to stand up in those sorts of situations. But, you know, depending on the industry you work in as well, some are, you know, far more dominated by men, and it's an unfortunate reality. And I would definitely have benefited at times to have someone step in and do that for me. And I know that, I guess in a way, it was a negative thing at the time and I would have loved to have had it. But having not had that, it's made me now later on in my career think I would want to be the person to do that for someone else. And I think I'm more acutely aware of situations when it happens because I've had that experience myself. So I really like that. It's something that you're definitely aware of doing. Yeah.
And also like, it's much easier. You're totally right. Doing it later in your career is very different to doing it at the beginning of your career. 100%. At the beginning of your career, you're seen as difficult. Later in your career, you're seen as confident. Unless you're a woman, then you're always seen as difficult. But, you know, as another thing that's useful about the chief exec title I've given myself, I bestowed it upon myself, as any small business founder does. You just give yourself a job title. It's wild. You just do that. It's easier to interrupt because the title immediately gives you gravitas, which is nuts. That's all held in our head. Like, think about that. Yeah. Everyone's assumed the power on the person just because they gave themselves a job title. It's all this mad game we're playing with each other without the other one saying it. So I think just being kind enough to interrupt someone on someone else's behalf, I think is a really lovely gesture. And I think as well, encouraging men to act as allies is really important. I'm very lucky in the fact that my business partner is the biggest feminist I know, the most active feminist I know. Greg is wonderful, such a huge advocate for women in immeasurable ways. He does a lot of stuff for them. And he will do the same thing. I really like it when I see another man do it on behalf of a woman. They'll just be like, sorry, she wasn't finished. Carry on.
It's even better.
Even better.
And so the second kind of question that I wanted to ask based on what we've just been talking about was advice then for people or women who are kind of more junior in their careers, who would look to you as, you know, kind of an inspirational figure who is in a leadership role. How would you say that they could go about positioning themselves to kind of get to where you are? Any tips or things that you've learned along the way?
I think the things that led to me running my own business, outside of me literally having Barbie dolls that ran their own businesses. I think from a very young age, I played with Barbies and they ran cafes. I was like, I'm going to run my own business, but I'm glad it wasn't a cafe. That's really hard work. So I went for something else. But I think outside of me constantly reinforcing that story for myself, I think the stuff for people entering the industry at the beginning, have it sounds like contradictory advice, but have loads of interest, but really clear focus. So I had a very clear focus on words. I went in and I was like, I like language. So any role that facilitates that, which was social media, search, content, copywriting, voice, any of that still gives you focus, even though all those things are quite disparate disciplines. But outside of that, really care about film, really care about books, care about podcasts, care about YouTube channels, popular culture. All of that stuff informs everything you're doing. And in marketing, the pace is breathtakingly quick. So you sort of, and I'm 33 now. I've fully got to an age where people are talking about things and I'm like, you are? I don't know what they're talking about, which is actually, I'll be honest, a wonderful feeling. I just don't care anymore. But also there are other things that I'll reference and people won't get. And that's the joy of having diverse teams, because you'll bring all of that weirdness together into a melting pot and produce something unusual. So my main advice would be like, be focused, but have wide interests. Be interested in being interesting. And then my other bit of advice would be try and, it's really difficult when you're first starting out because you just want a job, but really try and interrogate the business when you go into an interview, because I've now been on the receiving end of interviewing people. I'm acutely aware of all the mistakes I made in interviews now, having been the one interviewing people. The people I really love are people that turn up with really insightful questions for the person who runs the business. Like the best thing, I think one of the best things someone's ever asked me in an interview was like, what do you want to be doing in 2 years? You know, like when you're in an interview, they'll be like, where do you want to be in 5 years? They said to us, where do you want your business to be in 2 years? And they were like 22. I was like, I don't know. What
I'm not prepared for this question.
I'm interviewing you. But that's exactly what they should be doing. They should be walking into an interview and being like, so you have ambitions. How does my job help you achieve that?
Yeah.
That's clever. If you walk into an interview and you're like, whilst it's important I get this job, it's important I get on the track to where I want to be going, the whole purpose, think about the purpose of your job within the business. That's so astute to think that way and to be able to demonstrate that at interview level. I would guarantee that would get you a job. If you were able to say to someone, what do you care about? What's your ambition? How does my role help you get there? I would hire them on the spot. I'd be like, yeah, you get it. You get it. Particularly with a small business owner, because you're wearing 10 different hats and you're worrying about a million things at once. There's no calm. There's very rarely calm. So I think if someone was just like, but I'm here to make your job less stressful, so why is the role needed? What does the role help you do as a business? That's clever. I'd love someone to come in and say that to me again.
I like that. Anyone listening, great tip. Use it next time you're in an interview. No, that's really good. I hadn't actually thought of that before. And I mean, I imagine, did you feel a little bit caught off guard when you were asked that?
Yeah,
were you
massively.
Kind of like,
and because I'm quite a direct person, I like it when people are direct with me, particularly young women. I love an opinionated young woman. So when a girl really at the time said to me, she was like, well, where do you want to be in 2 years? I was like, God damn it, I don't know, but I'll think about it and I'll come up with an answer. So
and you hired.
You're great.
So. I love that. No, definitely. So something again that you mentioned a little bit earlier that we haven't kind of dived into yet, but I do want to, was fire starters that you talked about before. So what is fire starters? Where did it start? What's the background?
So fire starters is a sort of like, the way I always try and think about it is like a group of change makers that come together. And often if you turn up to a fire starters event, because they're events, effectively we'll set like a problem for a group of people in the room and be like, if you were trying to think about how to get this particular sector to collaborate more effectively, how could we do it? And we take everyone's lived experience in the room, their expertise, their understanding of that problem because of the role they have within the sector or outside of the sector completely. They could be completely removed from it. And then we basically try and record all those responses. The reason Firestarters came about is because myself and Aaron Fontenot, who co-founded it with me, we kept turning up to events and Aaron was the only black guy in the room. I was the only woman that looked like me. There was no one who looked like me at those events. It was all white guys in suits. And we were like, God, this is rubbish. And a big part of both of our roles, Aaron at the time was in a business development role. I was the founder. All my job was getting the money in. So I was like, we're not going to get the money in with these people. They're not going to buy from me and they're not going to buy from you. And that's rubbish. So we decided to, again, give the self a job you want. We made the event we wanted to turn up to. So we made Firestarters. And our events are deliberately inclusive. They're 100% a little bit odd. They'll be a bit challenging. We've got a series coming up soon that we're really excited about that's happening towards the end of the year. And most of the time, it's just us thinking about what's this big societal problem? How would these people at a local level deal with that problem? And how do we then make something happen? It's not only doing the talking, it's doing the action afterwards. Because one of my big problems when we talk about those types of problems is we talk and do nothing. And as a doer, massively a doer, I need to have a thing to do and I'll do it and I feel like I've accomplished something and I can calm down. Firestarters is the ultimate doing project. Yeah. You've got to talk and then find a solution to the thing you talked about. So Firestarters is basically like purpose-driven networking. So if you're someone who cares about stuff and you want to be in a room with fellow weirdos, Firestarters is the place to go, basically.
Great. I love that. I think that's an amazing pitch. I'm sold. Because we actually at Girls in Marketing are quite similar, and part of what we do and encouraging people to join our community, it was, Olivia, who's our founder, she kind of started Girls in Marketing out of a similar kind of principle, looking for something where she could network with other marketers, but not in that really traditional corporate, suited and booted,
it's
champagne
horrible.
and canapes type of vibe.
Yeah.
And all of us who work at Girls in Marketing, we have very varying interests, but then we also have like similarities in the way that we like to network, and it's not always centered around kind of going for drinks and that like really typical way of kind of networking and going out, even whether it's people outside of your organization or it's just socializing with people within the business, can be quite sort of like, excluding for people who just don't vibe in that way. They don't kind of get on with others in that sort of sense and don't want to go to those sorts of events, but feel obliged to in order to get on or progress or meet those right people. And you think, actually, should we be putting ourselves in a position where we have to speak to these people that we really don't want to? And what you've done is amazing, and that you've just gone, I don't want to do that. Let's create what we do want. And, as you say, obviously you're a doer, and it's just kind of the ideas come and you've done it, and it's fantastic. So obviously it's a different type of networking. What exactly would you say, kind of, if you could sum it up, like, what the specific things that you do and how it is actually like completely different, the things that you absolutely knew you did not want, other than kind of what you've already covered, what were those main things that you wanted to hit?
Yeah, so I think the way that Firestarters is different is it's actually quite structured. Like, the thing you were talking about of like, there's a tray of champagne and then people in a room, best of luck. You're just always, I find particularly knowing a lot, I'm not a naturally anxious person, but I know a lot of anxious people. That's a nightmare. It's like walking into like a wasp nest for someone with anxiety. It's just like, so there's booze that you don't want to drink, so you immediately feel like you failed. Then there's a load of people you don't know and there's no structure for talking to them. So we were like, so one of the main barrier points is the setting and the environment, the expectations, and also the structure just doesn't make any sense. So we looked at the way networking events work at quite a macro level, and we were like, okay, so if you were to completely restructure how they work, what makes it easier for people with neurodiversity, people of different genders, people who have got to go do the school run in 30 minutes. Like, you've got to really think about how people's days work and think about how you can make that better. So you've got like a main panel, you hear people talk, you can hear some interesting people talk. And then after that, you'll then put people in smaller groups, because talking in big groups is horrible and you don't actually do that. All you ever end up doing is talking to the person opposite you.
Yeah.
And then you get into groups of 5, everyone gets to introduce themselves. There's a facilitator, so you don't feel like you have to lead the conversation. And then you just allow people to talk, and you're like cajoled into feeling comfortable. And then you are comfortable. You feel like you've said what you want to say. You can communicate in any way you want. You can type, you can say it verbally, you can do whatever you want. If it's an in-person event, we'll always try and make them accessible. So we basically just try to challenge like all those things that make it feel uncomfortable to make it feel comfortable, and to remove any of the barriers, really. So in some ways, I think we've been really successful in that. And there's other things we can do to push that further.
Definitely. But I think that everything you've said so far it's incredible, and that you've thought of so many things. But I guess in creating it and having to think of, well, not having to, but choosing to think of all of those things and really address the stuff that you don't want and accommodate, so many different people and different needs and different wants and the ways of networking. I can imagine it has been quite a big challenge. Have you found it to be quite a big task and something that has taken up like quite a lot of your time, or is it just something that you don't really see as a challenge because you're so passionate about it?
I think it's misleading to think I'm doing the work. So I think I'm very good with Firestarters for like turning up about a week before and being like, so what are we doing? And the team have done a lot of the work.
Yeah.
Aaron, who I mentioned before, who co-founded it with us, his last day at Matchstick was literally yesterday. I'm so sad to lose him, but Aaron was absolutely the driving force behind that project. So he was used to doing that anyway, because he ran the project Culture Deck, which is a family-run project, and that it's the type of thing they did naturally. He runs the Jamaica Street festival that happens every year and stuff. So he has that in his blood. It was in his nature to do that. So we were very fortunate in the fact we had a team member who thought about that type of thing very instinctively. He was really good at that. So it absolutely came from Aaron. I can't give him enough credit for that. So it came from him. And then also we've got a supporting team behind the scenes. Lewis, who's our project manager. We've got Shannon, who does our content. We've got Jack, who thinks about things from a user experience point of view. So Jack, if we're running a virtual or a live event, it'll be like, so what's actually happening? And he'll think through the mechanics and be like, so if we do that, it's excluding this person, but it is including this person. So he really thinks about all the different people in the room. And bringing those people together to think about the challenge in that way produces a very different event. So I'm very much I'm considered the director lead on it. So I'm the person who makes sure that we give the time and resource to it. I'll be there running the whips, being like, what are you working on? What's happening next? But in terms of the actual mechanics and doing, a lot of it's the team. And I'll turn up like on the day. I'd co-host with Aaron when he was still with us, that kind of thing. So I'll naturally fit in where I need to be. But the biggest part for me on Firestarters is empowering other people to do their best work, and I just let them do it. Yeah, because they're better at it.
Yeah,
so I just let them do it.
And that's part of the role, isn't it? And it's making sure that you've got those right people to do it, which obviously it sounds like you have. And it sounds like a great way of going about actually organising events. I love the fact that you've got somebody whose role is to actually, part of what they're doing is thinking about the actual mechanics of everything and how what you do impacts on everybody who might attend, and how it could, be to the detriment of certain people, how it might exclude some people, and how you can address those issues before they arise. So it sounds like a really great way to me of actually structuring and managing events.
Yeah. Like I think the feedback we've got so far, predominantly it's been a virtual thing, which gave it a different set of rules to begin with. And that welcomes people. We have feedback from people who've turned up to those events that welcome people who just wouldn't go to an in-person event. It's too scary. They can't travel because they've got a disability, whatever it is, they just won't do it. So that welcomed those people to that space. Doing live events brought a different type of person, different set of needs for different reasons. It's naturally in the DNA of everything we do at Matchstick, so it was always going to translate to Firestarters anyway, because that's why we have those roles in the business. You have to think about how you're impacting people at every single touch point.
Yeah. Have you got a Firestarters highlight, a standout since you've started? Anything that you really think like, this is why we do it?
I think it would have to be, again, absolute credit to Aaron Fontenot and his ability to sweet talk anyone. He managed to get us into the Good Business Festival. We managed to get 3 events, and it was from our side organised chaos. They did a really excellent job of trying to figure it out, but we had to do it again because it's Aaron. He's very like, I've got this thing, but we've got to do it in 2 weeks. And we were like, okay. So we were like, he's really good at like doing that type of thing very quickly. So we just had to roll with it. But that was amazing because we got such good people in the room. Every single event had such a good vibe. We got really wonderful speakers from like the BBC and Homotopia and loads of good stuff. Like loads of good people came together, and it was, being in that room was exactly what we wanted it to be. It was one of those moments where you really manifest the thing you wanted, and that's really rare. So the Good Business Festival for me has been one of the best things we've ever done as a team. It was really excellent. So that's the one.
Amazing. Yeah. And congratulations.
Thanks.
So I think that kind of draws to a close everything that I wanted to chat about today. It's been so lovely having you on, and you've just brought such a lovely kind of refreshing perspective to the podcast. So it's just been really lovely to chat to you today. I just want to finish on a question that we ask our guests at the end of the podcast. So you mentioned earlier that you didn't actually know what marketing was before you got into marketing. So with what you now know about working in marketing and everything that comes with it, now since working in kind of leadership roles and stuff like that, what advice would you kind of go back and give to your younger self starting out in the industry?
It would be, and thinking of my younger self, so when I left uni, I'd have been like 21. I went straight from second, like A-levels and stuff. So I wouldn't have listened to the advice, I think is a really important thing to say here. I would not, if someone had given me this advice, honestly, I'd have been too lazy to do it. I think one of the things I found most startling about running a business is how much more energy I've got to do things before I never would have done. I'd been like, I can't be bothered. Running a business, I'm like, I absolutely will do that. You find the energy in reserves you didn't know you had. Mm-hmm. So my advice to someone starting out would be, first of all, listen to the advice. And second of all, it would be, I think it would be going back to that be interesting point. I think it would be always have interests in other areas and then think commercially. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely fine to watch a film and enjoy a film. I do that all the time. But when you're first starting out, you need to really question why that film got made. Why is that story being told? Who were the people telling the story? Who wrote the story? Who directed the story? Think of all those different things. Think of all the mechanics behind the industry of the thing you're watching. You, as the end consumer, there's so much work that's gone into that thing. It's really interesting to think about all the different steps that went into making that thing. And that's commercial mindedness. That's really thinking like, so if I've got to the point where I can sit down and watch it in my front room in my pajamas, mm-hmm. how much work happened for that to happen? And I think if you can demonstrate even just the slightest inkling or interest in thinking that way, that would really impress me. I really like people that think about the why. We're really fascinated by the why at Matchstick and at Firestarters. Like, why are we looking at that problem? Why are we addressing it mm-hmm. that way? So anything you can apply that to. You don't have to understand the mechanics of marketing to work in it at all. It's one of those careers where you can be massively over and underqualified and achieve the same thing. Mm. It's really unusual mm-hmm. in that way. Really unusual. It's not like being a solicitor. It's not like being a doctor. Yeah. You absolutely can just turn your expertise up and down and achieve a very similar result. It's very mm-hmm. unusual that way. So my advice to anyone starting out would be interested in everything and question everything and demonstrate you can question everything, because it's the demonstrating that makes you stand out.
I love that. I don't think I'm ever going to watch a film in the same way ever again. After you give me that piece of advice, I'm going to overanalyze absolutely everything that's
just think about it. It's just so much work. It's so much work. I'm always baffled by a film ever getting made. There's so many barriers for it not to get made. Same for a book, same for a poetry collection, same for an event. There's so many things that could make a thing not happen, but it did happen. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. What were all the things that came together to make that actually occur? Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Ruth. It's been absolutely lovely to have you.
Thank you. It's been really, really lovely way to spend an afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Right, that marks the end of another great episode. We really hope you enjoyed tuning in today. And if you did, please share with your friends, rate us on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify and watch the video version on YouTube. We've got so many exciting things coming, so we really love for you to get involved. See you soon.